Howdy, folks. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you, got a bit of a tabletop RPG video because this video it's going to pertain to Dungeons Dragons, but also Tiny Spies. Is realistically, it's going to work for any tabletop role-playing game, and that's because today I'm going to talk about creating a big bad evil guy. Now, I'm going to discuss how I do it. Everybody's probably got their own methods, but maybe this will give you some guidance or give you some ideas, whatever along those lines. But before I do dig in today's video, I want to take just a quick moment just to plug my Patreon. There's a link down below in the video description if you want to give the channel extra support. That's a good way of doing it. Also, liking the video, commenting, subscribing, stuff of that nature always helps me out too as a growing YouTuber. Now, with all that being said, let's get into today's video. So we are talking about creating a big bad evil guy. Now, there's a couple different ways to do this. One place I tend to start with is the plot. What kind of story do I want to tell? Where do I want it to start? Where do I want it to finish? What's going to be the conclusion? Things of that nature. And there's a lot of good plots that you can go off of from movies, comic books, video games. Uh, One of the best plots I think from actually James Bond was actually Goldfinger. So the plot for Goldfinger was just basically just a rich, greedy man with a whole lot of gold. And essentially the idea was as the story progressed, it seemed like the idea was going to be he was going to rob Fort Knox. When in all realistics, he was not going to rob Fort Knox. Instead, he was going to irradiate the gold at Fort Knox. So that way, the value of his gold would actually increase. I think that's actually a really good plot, and that kind of throws everything out of the ballpark, in my opinion, because it seemed like a robbery story, I guess a train robbery, if you will, and it turned out that that was not the case whatsoever, and it made for a very interesting story. Another James Bond one too is Raul Sylvia, where essentially his was a story of a spy that was left behind, feeling betrayed and wanting revenge. I felt that was a really good story, and it made for a very interesting bad guy as well as Javier, the actor, did a great job. I felt with the villain portraying the villain because, well, he just does a good job portraying villains. He's got like a certain gravitas to him, certain charisma that just works well for playing more charismatic villains. Another one could be maybe your big bad evil guy just wants to create chaos and watch the world burn. The Joker's a great example of this. And I think that's actually a good option in itself as just creating chaos. Or maybe it's just some kind of world conqueror that he's on some kind of conquest to take over maybe a kingdom that you're sworn to defend or anything along those lines. But I think a conqueror is a good way to go too. Or maybe it's just some kind of cult that wants to resurrect Tiamat and bring, death and destruction that way. Now, one thing I would avoid when it comes to the plot, in all honesty, is a world ending event. And there's a reason why I would avoid the world ending event when it comes to your plot. And realistically, it's really simple. If you're high, imagine a scale, okay? Um, if the very tip of the scale is a world-ending event, destroying the Earth or Kryn or whatever world setting you're in, how do you do better than that? Do you see my point? Like, if you want to keep the game going after your story, how do you top a world-ending event? You really can't. The only way you can really continue the story in any kind of meaningful, interesting way after your heroes stops said world-ending event is to have another world-ending event, and then another world-ending event, and then another world-ending event. So my opinion is when it comes to your story, is you definitely shouldn't tilt the scales too heavy too quickly. I would say it's fine to do a world-ending event, but you should really keep that kind of off to the side on the back burner type of deal, because essentially, if you keep having world-ending events, why is no one else getting involved in these world-ending events? And then how do you also make your stories better? Or even make your stories interesting. So if everything's a world-ending event, then it kind of becomes nothing's a world-ending event, essentially. Let's move on to the next part. Now, this is kind of interchangeable with the plot, and that is the background. Now, when if I decide to start with the background of the big bad evil guy, I will also do the why is he a big bad evil guy, and then I'll do the plot. So either I will start with the plot, or I will go to the background and the why as my first step, and then I will circle back to the plot. But the background, just to give some examples, I mean, your big bad evil guy, maybe he's some kind of rich baron. That's actually a good way to go, actually, in my opinion, because then they have resources, which I'll also get into here in a bit. Could be some kind of voodoo witch doctor that's raising an army of the undead. That would actually be a good one. Uh, could be evil scientist, or it could be an elite soldier. There's a lot of different ways you could go with this. It could be a politician or anything along those lines for your big bad evil guy. But essentially, what it comes down to is what is the big bad evil guy's background? What are their skills? What is their education? Do they come from a wealthy background? Things of that nature. Is it a religious character, or was a religious character? Is it a hero that's fallen from grace, or anything along those lines? So the background is a good way to go. I wouldn't say that the background has to be extremely fleshed out to, every detail of their life. But if you have a paragraph, two, maybe three, that should be good enough to work with for your character. And then the why and the resources should reflect the background, the character's background, the big bad evil guy's background, if you will. Which I'm going to get into now is the why. So the why I feel is one of the more important parts of it, because it can symbolize. First off, I don't really necessarily believe that every big bad evil guy should start off as a big bad evil guy, and that there should be some kind of why they are the big bad evil guy. May it be in the case of Magneto, he had suffered a series of traumas, the loss of his family, growing up in a concentration camp during World War II, being experimented on, trained as an assassin, etc., etc. That's if you go by the newer movies. Um, and essentially, just the world around him and everything that he had to deal with shaped him into being the big bad evil guy, having a despise for humans. Could it because of being money? Greed is a great reason to be a big bad evil guy. Talked about Goldfinger earlier. Good reason to become a big bad evil guy, to be honest. The world's essentially having the world by the balls with wealth. It seems like a very good way to go with the why. Could be world domination. Now, I said a bit ago about world ending events. World domination is not really a world ending event, but Cobra Commander would be Cobra, the organization, as well as Cobra Commander, would be a great example of someone who wants to dominate the world. Historic figures, you have Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Caesar, and the list just goes on and on. There's been many wannabe world conquerors over the years, and I think that's a perfectly good, legitimate reason for a big bad evil guy. Or it could be even the promise of power from a demonic prince or the devil himself. That's actually a good way to go with why your big bad evil guy is the big bad evil guy. Now then there's the next part. Now this is usually my step my step 4, if you will, and that is the resources. And there's a lot of different things to look at for the resources. Of course, one resource, and probably going to be the most prominent resource that every big bad evil guy is going to have, is henchmen or soldiers or whatever you want to call them, guards, I don't know. But anything along those lines, they should fit the bill, as well as they should also reflect the big bad evil guy in some way. May it be some kind of uniformed organization like Hydra. You had Cobra when it comes to G.I. Joe. There's so many different ways you could go with this. Spectre had their own henchmen for what it matters, as well as all the different various sub bosses, if you will, of Spectre had their own henchmen. So it's just kind of like an endless resource of henchmen. That should be one of the resources considered, as well as enforcers, lieutenants, assassins, spies, things of that nature, generals and other leaders within their army, if they have an army. That should also be reflected as a part of their resources, and it should reflect these should reflect the big bad evil guy himself, his skills, his background, as well as the plot. Technology is another part of it. Now, maybe with Dungeons and Dragons, not so much technology as more magic. There's an argument there for magic. Although technology could still be a part of it for Dungeons and Dragons, because you still do have siege engines like catapults and so on and so forth. Could be magic beast, such as dragons. There was the Dragonlance Chronicles. With Lord of the Rings, you had the orcs, you had the Orcai, you had the goblins. Of course, they are all henchmen. But then you also had the big bad evil guy also had all of their resources as well, which would be part of the technology part. And then, of course, the skills, the perks, the traits, their equipment, their wealth, so on, should all reflect their background, and it should all seem like an insurmountable problem, if you will. It should seem like if it's wealth, it should seem like that they have an endless amount of wealth. If your big bad evil guy is a more intelligent big bad evil guy, like say Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes, then his intelligence, his IQ, his brain power, if you will, his plot should just be insurmountable. The intelligence part of it, not necessarily so much the physical threat. Where on the other hand, if it's a great warrior fallen from grace, then maybe their skills, their perks, their traits, their equipment should reflect the fact that they are a great warrior. I think that's a great detail, and it's actually pretty important when it comes to the resources, in my opinion. And once again, it should all be tied to their background. Now, for a couple bonus points here, because I actually think there's other ways to go with the big bad evil guy too. And one of those is added depth. I think added depth, maybe your big bad evil guy has an absolute love for puppies, or maybe he is in control of some, I don't know, maybe he's the dictator of an island or a small country, and his primary goal is the welfare of the children of his country. Don't make him out to be a total dick, because if they do have a redeeming quality to him or a different point of view to him, then that makes the character more interesting and maybe even more scarier to your party of players. Also, another one too is the mock, or what I call the mock big bad evil guy. The big bad evil guy who looks like the big bad evil guy, and at the end of the day is not the big bad evil guy. Ronan the Accuser is a great example from this, from Guardians of the Galaxy. it was kind of betrayed for most of the movie that he was the big bad evil guy, and realistically, it wasn't him. It was Thanos the whole time, and he was just a pawn in Thanos' scheme. Now, he really was the big bad evil guy of Guardians of the Galaxy, but all in all, in the big picture of things, he was not the big bad evil guy at all. But anyway, folks, I think this video is long enough. Gave you some examples, gave you some ideas. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to comment down below. I do keep an eye on my notifications for YouTube. So, if there's any questions or if you need some more clarity, I will take the time and I will try to give you more clarity. But anyway, folks, hopefully you all enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching and have yourself a wonderful day.